The void between the stars shimmered for a brief, impossible moment, a thin rift of silver and violet that defied every law the galaxy knew. Across hyperspace lanes, Imperial sensors picked up nothing, no signal, no heat, no radiation signature. Just the quiet, unnerving feeling of being watched. And then without warning, a figure fell from the void. He didn't arrive in a ship. He didn't crash. He simply materialized above the storm-swept clouds of Coruscant, suspended for a heartbeat in the pale light of the city world's artificial sun, before gravity claimed him. Magnets screamed, metal groaned, the skyline trembled, speeders wobbled, their thrusters struggling to compensate for the sudden distortion in local magnetic fields. Holoscreen feeds flickered across the planet, showing reports of a metal storm descending from orbit, as shards of Coruscant's own towers trembled and swayed, pulled by an unseen hand. Officers in the Imperial Security Bureau scrambled, and a star destroyer above the city tilted unexpectedly, its hull shivering as if the universe itself had misaligned. This was no ordinary threat. This was Eric Lensherr, Magneto. Warrior, revolutionary, mutant, master of magnetism, he had battled gods, soldiers, and monsters in his own world, each victory etched into the iron of his will. Yet even he paused now, scanning this strange galaxy. Stars burned differently here, distant suns not aligned like those he had known. The Force whispered in patterns he couldn't read, a subtle energy that tugged at his senses in ways unfamiliar, yet not entirely threatening. Here, he would be untethered by the limitations of any government, army, or law he had ever known. But he would not be alone. The rift had thrown him into the Empire era, a time when the galaxy shuddered under the iron grip of Emperor Palpatine. The Jedi were nearly extinct, whispers of survivors carried on the winds like ghosts. The rebellion scratched out a fragile existence while star destroyers patrolled star systems with their terror fleets. To a tactician like Magneto, the Empire presented an irresistible puzzle. Hundreds of ships of pure metal, controlled by human minds, still bound to predictable hierarchies. And above all, star destroyers were his kind of weapon. Eric's hands extended instinctively, fingers splayed as he let the currents of metal and iron around him flow into his perception. A nearby tower cracked, steel supports bending to his will, blaster turrets unslung from their mounts, they spinning lazily in the air, awaiting command. He felt the hum of a landing star destroyer's repulsor lifts through the planet's magnetic field, a vibration in the metal that sang to his senses. A smile curved his lips. He had arrived, and in a way, the galaxy's largest war machines were already answering him. But before he could test the reach of his powers fully, alert sirens screamed across Coruscant. Emergency comms cut through every frequency. Unidentified magnetic anomaly. All units respond. Stormtroopers scrambled, blasters ready, but their bullets clanged uselessly off nearby metal beams, deflected by forces they could not see, let alone comprehend. The city's civilians panicked, spilling into the streets, while above, the Star Destroyer's shields shimmered under his influence. They were massive, unwieldy, and most importantly, magnetic. Every ship within orbit was his potential weapon, a tool to bend the galaxy's might to his will. Yet Magneto was cautious. He had learned the hard way that raw power could destroy the world around him as easily as it could protect it. He needed information first, and here Coruscant provided a perfect window. Surveillance drones flitted around him like confused birds, their metal bodies vibrating against his invisible field. He plucked one from the air, examining it closely. Its programming was simple, human-engineered, but effective. From this he could trace the flow of communications, the channels between star destroyers and Imperial officers. From there, he would learn the limits of this new universe's technology and its vulnerabilities. Imperial officers were quick to respond. In the bridge of the Star Destroyer Executor, Admiral Piet's fingers danced over controls as the readings of magnetic interference spiked. "What in the galaxy?" he muttered. "Sir, all ships are registering extreme magnetic anomalies. Shields are fluctuating, weapons offline." Darth Vader's presence filled the command chamber, a towering shadow of black armor and whispered authority. "I sense a presence, unusual," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of certainty. The Force brushed against this new arrival in strange patterns, alerting him to something powerful, something ancient, and yet alien. Vader's hand twitched. Lightsaber hummed softly at his side. The Emperor had spoken of mutants in distant galaxies before, curious diversions in holo archives, but none had materialized in person. This one was different. Or the Force could not measure him, could not predict him fully. That, in itself, was a threat. Orders were given for immediate containment, and squads of TIE fighters accelerated toward the anomaly. Magneto felt them before he saw them, tiny hunks of metal streaking through the sky, drawn to the iron in their construction. With a flick of his wrist, he sent them spinning, their pilots screaming as their craft tore apart mid-flight. The streets of Coruscant were chaos incarnate. Civilians screamed, speeder bikes careened in every direction, and stormtroopers found themselves weaponless against a power they could not hope to counter. Yet amid this, Magneto's mind raced. He was not here merely to dominate. He was here to test, to understand, to observe. The Empire was more than the soldiers and the fleets. They were a hierarchy, rigid, predictable, obsessed with control. That made them vulnerable. And if he could bend their weapons to his will, he could reshape the galaxy in a way no one else could imagine. In the midst of this, a faint disturbance tickled at his awareness. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a different kind of energy. Not metal, not technology, something living, something Force-sensitive. He focused, scanning the nearby streets. A young figure darted through the chaos, robes whipping behind him, a small green lightsaber clutched tightly. The kid was clearly Jedi-trained, though inexperienced, hesitant in movement, panicked, but instinctively sensing danger. Magneto's eyes narrowed. The Force was foreign to him, an unpredictable element in a galaxy that prized order through metal and machines. He did not understand it fully, but he could feel it, like a pulse in the magnetic field. "Interesting," he murmured. "You are different." The words were lost in the wind, but his intent was clear. The Jedi, however, did not stop. He could see the fear in their eyes, the determination. They were outmatched, but they would fight regardless. Magneto weighed his options: intervene, test, or simply let them run. Each choice carried consequence, and in this galaxy, choices had weight. Across the horizon, the first Star Destroyers responded. Their massive frames trembled under his influence, but Magneto did not yet push them fully. The show of power alone was enough to instill hesitation, and hesitation was a tool he had learned to wield with deadly precision. The Empire had resources, but they lacked imagination. They were predictable. He could bend them, shape them, control them. But first, he needed to understand the galaxy's rules. The Force was the one unknown variable. In that moment, Magneto's eyes scanned the orbiting vessels, the streets below, the fleeing citizens, and the trembling stormtroopers. Every piece of metal, every weak link, every machine and armor plate hummed under his awareness. And yet, there was a strange allure to this galaxy, a complexity he had not anticipated. Humans were not the only players. Jedi ghosts lingered, their presence like a whisper across the magnetic field. The Force pulsed around him, challenging, daring him to understand it. He smiled again, a grim, calculating grin. This world was different, but he was ready. The Star Destroyers would answer him, willingly or not. And the Empire. They would learn the meaning of power in a way the galaxy had never seen. But if you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, smash that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. A voiceover from the unseen narrator prompted, "The Force protects those who support this channel." Magneto's hands tightened slightly, drawing steel reinforcements from nearby structures, a miniature storm swirling around him as the city trembled. Coruscant had never seen anything like this, and across the stars, the Empire had no idea that their next enemy was already bending their own weapons against them. The game had begun, and in this galaxy, a master of metal was now in play. As he rose above the city, levitating debris in a controlled halo, his mind considered strategy, logistics, and targets. Star Destroyers would orbit under his command. The stormtroopers could be neutralized without a single shot fired. The young Jedi below was curious but inconsequential. For now, Magneto was not here to destroy randomly. He was here to dominate, to reshape, to bend the Empire to his vision. Above him, the sky shimmered faintly, remnants of the rift still visible for those who knew to look. It would close soon, leaving no trace of how this stranger had arrived. But the galaxy would remember him. Coruscant, the jewel of the Empire, had felt the first tremors of Magneto's arrival. And far above, orbiting in perfect synchronicity under his invisible hand, the first Star Destroyers began to move. Just slightly at first, imperceptibly, yet unmistakably. The Empire had met a new force, a new power, and it would not be ignored. The game had only begun. Magneto hovered above Coruscant, suspended amid a halo of twisted metal, as the city trembled beneath him. He could feel the heartbeat of the planet through the steel of its towers, the massive conduits of durasteel and alloys vibrating in harmony with his own magnetic senses. Even at full capacity, he moved deliberately, knowing that any careless gesture could collapse entire sections of the city. Yet hesitation was a luxury, and the Empire would not wait. Already, the response fleets were coalescing in orbit, cruisers and Star Destroyers shifting in patterned formations, unaware that they were now instruments under the command of a master who did not recognize their authority. In orbit above, the first of the Imperial-class Star Destroyers began to tilt, their engines humming with strain as their metal hulls aligned involuntarily with Magneto's invisible pull. Thousands of tons of steel, reinforced durasteel, and hyperdrive components quivered at his will. With a subtle flick of his wrist, he tested the limits. The Devastator, one of Vader's fleet, shuddered, its turbolasers misaligned, shields pulsating erratically. He felt the mines aboard, Engineers, bridge officers, gunners, pushing back through instinct, attempting to stabilize the impossible. Their efforts amused him. They were clever, but not clever enough. Below, the city's streets were a tableau of chaos and awe. Citizens gawked at levitating debris, stormtroopers clumsily attempting to react, and the occasional speeder tossed like a leaf in a violent storm. And yet, not everyone fled. Some instinctively took cover behind steel barricades, their eyes reflecting the strange interplay of power. The Force-sensitive among them, Jedi or survivors in hiding, could sense the ripple of something ancient and alien. Younglings in the lower levels of the Senate district whispered prayers, unsure whether they invoked the Force or some other power entirely. Magneto ignored them. He was not here for the frightened. He was here for the strong, the structures, the vessels, the very bones of the Empire. A hum from the city's core drew his attention. His senses, finely attuned to metal, detected an anomaly, a magnetic signature unlike any human-made alloy he had encountered. It pulsed beneath the city streets like a heartbeat, shifting in patterns almost organic. Curiosity piqued. He diverted a small section of steel scaffolding and twisted it downward, breaking open a hatch to peer into the bowels of Coruscant. A maintenance droid scuttled across the floor, its metal frame quivering under his influence. He lifted it and tilted it, watching as it obeyed his unspoken commands. Here, in these forgotten tunnels, the Empire had hidden more than machinery. They had secrets, and Magneto's instincts told him that controlling the city required understanding its veins as much as its visible structures. In orbit, Imperial commanders attempted a coordinated strike. TIE squadrons darted through the sky, blasters firing indiscriminately. But their weapons were insignificant. Each projectile twisted mid-air under Magneto's subtle manipulations, striking uninhabited sections of the city or dissipating harmlessly. Then the bridge officers cursed and shouted, their panic rising as the reality set in. The anomaly was not just strong, it was intelligent, calculating, and merciless. Reports flooded the holocoms. Magnetic anomaly controlling capital-class starships, shields failing, weapons offline. Vader's helmet tilted slightly as he observed the anomaly, his gloved hands resting lightly on his belt. This presence, it is not the Force as we know it, Vader said, his voice low, measured. His senses reached out, probing, attempting to understand the nature of this being. Yet every instinct warned him this was not a Jedi, nor Sith, nor droid, nor even biological weapon. It was a predator, a strategist, a mind capable of bending metal as easily as the Force bends the universe. He had faced many threats before, but none like this. Meanwhile, Magneto's attention shifted to the small, persistent Jedi he had sensed earlier. The young figure had regrouped, ducking behind a crumbling durasteel barrier and igniting a green lightsaber with a hiss that cut through the din of chaos. The weapon glowed softly in the storm, a fragile light in a sea of metal and destruction. Magneto's eyes narrowed. This one was weak, inexperienced, but perceptive. A distraction? Perhaps. Or a student foolish enough to interfere in a battle far beyond their comprehension. The Jedi hesitated, their small frame trembling, yet they stepped forward. You're not from this galaxy, they said, voice steady despite obvious fear. The Force, it tells me you're dangerous, but I sense conflict in you. You do not belong to the dark side, nor the light. Why are you here? Magneto's expression was unreadable. He tilted his head, considering the question. "I am here because this world fascinates me," he replied, voice calm, deliberate. "I seek to understand its weaknesses, its strengths, and to test its limits. You are insignificant, yet curious." He extended a hand toward a nearby chunk of steel piping, drawing it upward and spinning it like a baton. The young Jedi's eyes widened. "I am not your enemy, yet. But if you stand in my way, I will treat you as such." The Jedi, sensing the futility of direct confrontation, retreated into the shadows of a nearby overpass. Magneto allowed it, studying them as one might observe an insect trapped in amber. Their presence intrigued him, not because of their skill, but because of the subtle threads of the force that laced through the surrounding metal and energy grids. Unlike the humans of his world, whose technological and magnetic innovations were predictable, these force-sensitive beings introduced variables he could not yet fully anticipate. That made them interesting. Above, Magneto focused on the star destroyers. Using a combination of instinct and precise calculation, he began to subtly adjust their trajectories. One by one, the massive vessels began to pivot slightly, engines whining in protest, but obeying nonetheless. He did not push them fully, not yet. A full demonstration of his power could provoke the Empire into total war. No, he needed a measured display, a demonstration of what was possible if the galaxy bent to his will. Stormtroopers on the ground continued to struggle, attempting to deploy anti-metal countermeasures, but none were effective. Magneto's field extended outward, bending every metallic object within range to respond to his thoughts. Debris, armor, vehicles, and ships all became part of a single orchestra conducted by his mind. And yet he noticed something. The force was subtly resisting him, threading through some metals, deflecting subtle magnetic alignment. It was not enough to stop him, but it was a warning. Some elements in this galaxy were fundamentally different, infused with energy beyond mere ferrous attraction. He shifted focus to the larger tactical picture. Coruscant was the stage, but the Empire's fleet was the tool. With even partial control over star destroyers, he could orchestrate orbital bombardments, blockade entire sectors, or manipulate fleet formations without a single blaster fired. The young Jedi might attempt interference, but their power was negligible compared to the mass and weight of the vessels at his command. Magneto's mind raced with possibilities, analyzing the Empire's predictable hierarchy and the latent potential of its mechanical assets. The first attempt to resist came from a nearby star destroyer, attempting evasive maneuvers. The engines strained, hull plating creaking under invisible forces. Magneto extended his will, and the ship froze mid-maneuver, then tilted gently, aligning with the invisible direction of his command. Officers shouted through open channels, but the voice of authority, the Emperor somewhere in the shadows, was absent. They had no guidance. The anomaly commanded not just metal but obedience, a power the Empire's soldiers could not comprehend. Even as he extended his influence, Magneto's senses detected subtle traces of a hidden network. Small, intricate systems embedded in Coruscant's infrastructure, emergency conduits, and energy grids that attempted to interfere with magnetic alignment. They resisted, but Magneto's control was precise. He wove around them, allowing some systems to function while neutralizing others, demonstrating his mastery not only of brute force but of strategy and finesse. The young Jedi, meanwhile, had regrouped and made a bold choice to ascend into the chaos, moving along the debris and metal fragments suspended in Magneto's field. They ignited their lightsaber and struck at a floating turret caught mid-air. Magneto's field twisted subtly in response, deflecting the attack without revealing the full extent of his power. He watched carefully, noting their techniques, anticipating the ways they might interfere in future battles. Each action they took was data, and data was power. In orbit, Magneto began a demonstration. One Star Destroyer tilted, then another, forming a subtle, hypnotic pattern in the sky above Coruscant. Blaster fire from TIE fighters was harmlessly redirected into the void. The city below was a mixture of fear and awe as people glimpsed the impossible. A man controlling the Empire's might without a single shot fired. And across the streets, the young Jedi watched, understanding for the first time that they faced a power entirely unlike anything the Force had previously prepared them for. Magneto allowed himself a small smile. The Empire had been a fascinating puzzle from the moment he arrived. Now, with observation complete and preliminary tests underway, he was ready to escalate. But Star Destroyers could be weapons or deterrents, metal could be manipulated or thrown, and the Jedi were curiosities to be studied. The first chapter of his presence in this galaxy had concluded. The next would be a demonstration, and the Empire would learn that control was no longer theirs to command. Above, the rift shimmered faintly, reminding him that this arrival was a temporary bridge between worlds. Soon, it would close, leaving him stranded entirely in this galaxy. That was acceptable. Magneto had survived worse. What mattered now was understanding this galaxy's rules, bending them to his will, and showing the galaxy, imperial or otherwise, that metal had a master beyond their reckoning. And in that suspended moment, the city, the fleet, and the Jedi below all became part of an unfolding game, one that would change the Empire forever. Magneto's dominance over the orbiting Star Destroyers was no longer subtle. Each massive vessel now responded as though guided by a single invisible hand, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of steel. The hum of engines, the crackle of shields, the distant vibration of repulsor lifts, all converged into a low-frequency resonance that only he could fully perceive. Yet he knew caution was necessary. A full display of raw force would provoke the Empire into total war. The demonstration had to be controlled, strategic, terrifying enough to be respected but restrained enough to allow further exploration of this galaxy's unique variables. Below him, the city's streets were a chaotic ballet of fear and awe. Stormtroopers, still reeling from the initial display of magnetic manipulation, attempted to regroup and contain the panicked citizens. The blaster fire against debris suspended in the air did little more than ricochet harmlessly, sparks scattering into the sky. Civilian vehicles lifted slightly from the ground, caught in the fringe of his magnetic field, swaying precariously like leaves on a gale. Despite the chaos, some civilians paused to watch, their expressions a mixture of horror and wonder. For many, the impossible had become undeniable reality. A single man could command the Empire's weapons without stepping aboard a single ship. Yet even in the midst of power, Magneto's instincts reminded him that observation was as crucial as action. The Force-sensitive presence he had detected earlier, the young Jedi, was moving cautiously among the debris. their lightsaber a flickering green beacon. Unlike the soldiers of the Empire, this one's movements were unpredictable. They guided not by hierarchy or protocol, but by instinct and intuition. Magneto could sense faint ripples in the magnetic alignment of nearby metals whenever the Jedi shifted, subtle adjustments in his field that the human mind might not even register. Fascinating. He allowed a momentary pause, letting the Star Destroyers hover slightly off their orbital paths, engines whining, shields pulsating. Then with deliberate intent, he began a small escalation. One of the Star Destroyers, the Oblivion, tilted sharply, pointing its massive dorsal turbolasers toward a warehouse district in the lower levels of Coruscant. Sparks and small explosions erupted as his magnetic field nudged metal crates, vehicles, and debris into improvised barricades and obstacles. The Imperials aboard scrambled desperately, attempting to regain control, but every adjustment they made was subtly countered by Magneto's will. A nearby Jedi reacted. With a flick of their wrist, they deflected a flying steel beam with their lightsaber, the green blade sparking against the cold metal. Magneto noted the skill, but also the limitations. The Jedi was effective against small, fast-moving objects, but could not influence the massive Star Destroyers above. Yet the presence of the Force introduced variables he could not fully account for. It was a subtle push and pull, a challenge, a test of limits he had not encountered before in his own world. "Impressive," Magneto murmured to himself, observing the Jedi's cautious maneuvers, "but inadequate." He extended his influence further, drawing nearby metal into the orbiting dance of his control, fragments of construction cranes, speeder parts, and steel supports hovered around the city streets, forming a protective barrier against potential attacks from stormtroopers or small craft. Magneto could feel the city's pulse through the metals, the hum of energy grids, and the slight interference of force currents, all feeding into his awareness. This was not just a display of brute strength, it was strategy, adaptability, and absolute control. In orbit, the Empire's chain of command strained under the pressure. Admiral Piet barked orders across comms, trying to coordinate an intercept with other capital ships. All TIE wings, maintain formation, target the anomaly and engage. Yet the anomaly, Magneto, was not a target in the conventional sense. Each vessel, each piece of metal, was already responding to his subtle adjustments. Fire was deflected, shields shifted, engines misaligned. Attempts to concentrate firepower only served to highlight their vulnerability. Even the most sophisticated Imperial weaponry was ineffective when commanded by a will outside the galaxy's norms. Vader, observing from the bridge of the Executor, felt a dissonance in the Force. This was unlike any Jedi he had ever confronted, any Sith he had trained under, or any tactical scenario he had experienced. "This is no simple mortal," he said, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "The anomaly is intelligent. It calculates, adapts, anticipates, and it is unbound by the Force, yet not immune to it." On the ground, Magneto noted Vader's presence. The black-armored figure radiated authority, a palpable disturbance in the Force that was both a challenge and a warning. He considered confrontation, but chose observation. The Emperor's enforcer was formidable, but direct engagement would reveal too much too soon. Patience, Magneto reminded himself. Patience was key. First, understand the system, bend the tools of the Empire. Then, when the stage was set, test the players one by one. Meanwhile, the young Jedi made a bold decision. Realizing that direct attack against the Star Destroyers was futile, they darted toward a nearby communications hub, hoping to disrupt Imperial coordination. Magneto, sensing the movement through subtle fluctuations in metal and energy, allowed it, observing the humans' ingenuity, the Jedi's ability to adapt, to find weak points, to exploit small advantages. It was minor, yet significant. He made a mental note. In this galaxy, strategy would always require adaptation, but when the Force added layers of unpredictability, he could not ignore. As the Jedi disappeared into the network of tunnels and maintenance conduits, Magneto focused outward. He lifted a fleet of smaller vessels into an orbital pattern, aligning them around Coruscant in a subtle, hypnotic formation. The effect was both protective and intimidating. Any Imperial response would now have to contend not only with his direct manipulation of capital ships, but also with the latent threat posed by hundreds of smaller craft he could control simultaneously. Every object of metal, from the smallest repair droid to the largest Star Destroyer, became part of an intricate system under his command. Yet he sensed limits. Some metals, alloys reinforced with rare compounds, resisted his influence slightly, but particularly those infused with exotic elements unknown to his world. It was not insurmountable, but it required concentration and adjustment. He tilted his head, considering these anomalies. There were secrets in this galaxy's technology, layers of complexity that went beyond brute force. This was a challenge, a puzzle, one that required observation, patience, and adaptation. The Empire was beginning to react more aggressively. A squadron of TIE interceptors moved to flank him, coordinated, precise, guided by both tactical programming and instinctive command. Magneto, anticipating their path, redirected metal debris in the streets below, creating a field of obstacles that forced them to maneuver violently. Engines straining, weapons misfiring. One interceptor slammed into a steel support he had suspended mid-air, and spinning helplessly before crashing into a nearby street. Others attempted to retreat, only to find their navigation systems subtly warped by his magnetic interference. From the shadows, the Jedi re-emerged, having disrupted the comms network temporarily. Magneto observed their movements with analytical precision, noting how their connection to the Force allowed them to anticipate some changes in metal, but not others. Their skill was real, adaptive, and potentially dangerous, but not yet sufficient to challenge him directly. It was a reminder that while this galaxy offered new tools, it also introduced new variables that could complicate even the most carefully orchestrated plans. Above, in orbit, the Star Destroyers remained subtly aligned, each vessel responding to Magneto's will like marionettes in a cosmic ballet. Shields fluctuated. New engines hummed and weapons arrays pointed in non-threatening directions, a demonstration of control without aggression. The Empire had the power to strike back, but they lacked the insight, the adaptability, and the understanding to do so effectively. The anomaly was not merely powerful, it was intelligent, calculating, and patient. Magneto considered the next steps. He could have unleashed destruction, crushed the city and its inhabitants in a display of unrestrained power. But that was unnecessary. Demonstration and control were more effective than slaughter. The Empire would learn fear through subtlety, through inevitability, through the realization that every ship, every turret, every weapon they had could be turned against them. Not through sabotage, but through the simple, inescapable dominance of a master over metal. And in the midst of this, the city watched. Civilians, soldiers, and the Jedi alike observed the impossible. They saw metal obeying thought, ships moving without pilots, weapons rendered impotent by the sheer force of will. For many, this was incomprehensible. For Magneto, it was confirmation. In this galaxy, the rules could be bent. The Empire could be manipulated. The Force was a variable, not an obstacle. A low hum from the orbiting star destroyers reached him, subtle vibrations through the magnetic field. He could feel the latent power of the vessels, the tension in their hulls, the resistance of the technology, and he smiled, calculating, patient. The game had entered a new phase. The Empire would escalate. The Jedi might interfere. And somewhere, perhaps, the Emperor himself would take notice. But Magneto was ready. He had survived gods, armies, and monsters in his own world. This galaxy, with all its rules, its force, and its unpredictability, was merely another challenge, and he intended to dominate it, not through fear alone, but through absolute unyielding control of the very metal that defined its power. Above Coruscant, the skyline shimmered with suspended debris and the trembling outlines of partially levitated buildings. Magneto's influence over metal was no longer subtle. Street-level chaos mirrored orbital manipulation. Star destroyers hovered like gargantuan predators under his will, their massive hulls aligned with invisible threads of magnetic command. Blaster turrets wavered, TIE fighters were forced into impossible maneuvers, and the city's citizens either fled in terror or froze, mesmerized by the display. But even as the spectacle unfolded, Magneto's mind raced, calculating not just immediate control but long-term strategy. He had learned from his previous battles that overwhelming force alone did not ensure victory. Intelligence, adaptability, and psychological dominance were key. Coruscant's political heart, and the imperial bureaucracy, would not be neutralized by raw displays alone. He needed to probe, provoke, and test, forcing the Empire to reveal its capabilities while maintaining the illusion of unpredictability. From orbit, Imperial Command struggled to respond. Admiral Piet barked orders, but his voice was drowned out by the low hum of the Star Destroyer's engines, fighting against Magneto's subtle manipulations. Shields flickered, weapon arrays spun slightly off target, and navigational systems whined under invisible strain. On the bridge of the Executor, Darth Vader's presence was palpable, a shadow cutting across the magnetic field like a cold blade. "The anomaly is calculating," he said, his voice low and measured. "It does not act rashly. Observe its pattern. Anticipate its actions. Prepare for escalation." Magneto, feeling the Force-sensitive presence again, allowed himself a brief smile. The young Jedi had resurfaced, moving through the debris with agility and caution. Their green lightsaber cut a sharp line through the chaos, deflecting metal fragments hurled with deadly precision. Magneto's field adjusted subtly to account for these shifts. Deliberately, strategically, he allowed the Jedi to interfere just enough to gauge their abilities, noting how they leveraged the Force to predict movements, anticipate changes in momentum, and even resist subtle magnetic influence. It was, in his estimation, clever, but insufficient. The first coordinated countermeasure from the Empire arrived as a squadron of modified TE interceptors, escorted by an assault team of AT-AT walkers descending into Coruscant's lower sectors. Magneto tilted his head, really sensing the intricate flow of metal through the city. The AT-ATs were formidable, heavily armored and designed to instill fear. Yet even their massive legs and reinforced exteriors were susceptible to his control. With a thought, he caused one walker's hydraulic pistons to seize mid-stride, forcing it to collapse into the street with a deafening crunch. Civilians screamed, stormtroopers scrambled, and the remaining walkers hesitated, their programming unable to account for a force acting outside all known logic. The orbital star destroyers responded as well. One attempted to fire turbolasers directly at Magneto's location, aiming to obliterate the city and him along with it. He responded instantaneously, subtly adjusting the magnetic field to misalign the energy projectors. The shots fired, but rather than hitting him, the beams slammed into each other mid-air, exploding in harmless arcs of plasma high above the streets. Another destroyer attempted evasive maneuvers, only to find its engines realigned subtly, forced into a pattern dictated by Magneto's thought. The Empire had firepower, but he had control. The young Jedi, sensing the broader implications, darted toward an exposed maintenance hub, hoping to disrupt communication channels and hinder Magneto's awareness of Imperial movements. He allowed it, intrigued by the audacity. Their presence was more than symbolic. It demonstrated the ingenuity that only Force-sensitive beings could introduce into an otherwise predictable mechanical landscape. Magneto tracked their movements, feeling the subtle disturbances they caused in his field and noting the limitations of their reach. That Force-sensitive though they were, they could not manipulate metal in the quantities or precision he commanded. Across the planet, Imperial officials debated desperate measures. Senate bureaucrats, hidden away in fortified chambers, panicked as reports poured in. Star destroyers in orbit were behaving erratically, blaster fire was ineffective, and city-level infrastructure was collapsing under a force they could not identify. Even the Emperor's enforcers, confident in their supremacy, admitted privately that the situation was unlike anything previously catalogued. The anomaly was intelligent, deliberate, and adaptive. Every attempt to suppress it was met with calculated counteraction. Magneto now considered escalation. Up until this point, he had tested limits and gathered information. He had gauged the Empire's response times, and the interplay of human and Force-sensitive elements, and the structural weaknesses of the city itself. Now it was time to demonstrate not just control, but consequence. With a subtle shift, he aligned a series of star destroyers in a precise pattern above Coruscant. Each ship tilted, engines whining under strain, weapon arrays focused, not to destroy yet, but to symbolize his dominance. Sparks and small debris cascaded from orbit, striking buildings like controlled meteor showers, leaving residents and Imperial personnel alike stunned. The young Jedi attempted a bold intervention, leaping across floating debris with their lightsaber extended. They targeted a cluster of smaller suspended Star Destroyer components, hoping to disrupt Magneto's formation. He responded with gentle precision, redirecting the pieces without crushing them. He subtly demonstrating that while he could destroy, he chose not to. The Jedi's eyes widened, realizing that this was not merely a display of raw power. It was calculated mastery. Every movement, every adjustment, every tilt of the Star Destroyers was deliberate, communicative, and intentional. Vader's presence became more pronounced. His gloved hands clenched at his sides, sensing the anomaly in the Force. This was no mere mortal. No Jedi or Sith he had encountered could influence the galaxy on such a scale without significant Force amplification. Yet the anomaly did not appear to draw from the Force at all. Its power was different, alien, and terrifying in its purity. Vader considered immediate engagement, but intelligence dictated patience. Observing Magneto, understanding him, and then predicting his next move was essential before committing fully. The Empire could not afford recklessness. Meanwhile, civilians continued to flee, some inadvertently aiding Magneto's testing. His field, attuned to subtle ferrous traces in vehicles, scaffolding, and metallic objects, allowed him to create a dynamic battlefield where every movement, intentional or accidental, reinforced his advantage. Debris became barriers, traps, and pathways simultaneously. The young Jedi moved within this chaotic ballet, attempting to counteract the patterns and protect fleeing civilians. Magneto watched, noting the human ingenuity, adaptability he admired, though ultimately insufficient to overcome the disparity in power. Imperial communications crackled with urgency. All units, maintain engagement protocols, deploy additional TIE squadrons, attempt direct assault on the anomaly. Magneto, sensing the intensifying coordination, adjusted his orbital star destroyers to create subtle interference fields. TIE fighters spun mid-air, engines failing, weapons misfiring. Larger vessels attempted evasive maneuvers, only to find their engines subtly realigned in a manner that maintained formation, but left them exposed to his inspection. The Empire's might, formidable as it was now a playground under his guidance. At ground level, the Jedi tried a more tactical approach. Using the Force, they pulled and pushed smaller metallic fragments to shield citizens and counter Magneto's field. It was a clever demonstration of strategy, and Magneto allowed it to continue, studying the Jedi's methods. He noted how Force-sensitive beings could influence his environment indirectly, manipulating the magnetic flow on a small scale without fully overriding it. It was a challenge he had not anticipated. This subtle interplay of alien powers added a layer of complexity he had not yet encountered in his own battles. Magneto tilted his head slightly, considering the broader picture. Coruscant was merely the first stage. The Empire, for all its strength, was reactive. The rebellion had not yet been accounted for, and other factions, mercenaries, underworld syndicates, Mandalorian enclaves, remained beyond his immediate perception. Each presented variables that could either hinder or enhance his control over this galaxy. Information, observation, and strategic patience were now paramount. The demonstration reached its peak as he orchestrated a subtle but visually striking maneuver. Debris, star destroyers, and city-level metallic objects aligned in patterns visible even from the surface, symbols of impossible power, of intelligence controlling brute force. Civilians, stormtroopers, and the young Jedi alike paused to witness the spectacle, a surreal moment where the impossible became tangible. And throughout it all, Magneto remained detached, observing, calculating, waiting for the Empire to reveal its true capabilities. He had tested limits. He had demonstrated control. He had observed resistance, adaptability, and ingenuity. Now the Empire, and the galaxy would respond, and in their reaction, he would discover the next phase of opportunity. Coruscant was merely a canvas. The galaxy was the palette, and he intended to paint it with calculated precision, bending every metallic structure, every weapon, and every starship to his will. Coruscant's skyline quivered under Magneto's presence. The suspended debris, twisting and spinning like shards of some metallic storm, cast fractured shadows across the city's layers. Orbital star destroyers, aligned in hypnotic formations, hummed with restrained power, while smaller craft hovered unnaturally, unable to act against the invisible force guiding them. The young Jedi, still moving among the chaos, paused atop a crumbling overpass. Their green lightsaber flickered, and they considered their next move carefully. Magneto's reach was vast, yet his restraint offered a fleeting opening, a chance to interact without immediate annihilation. But Magneto's focus had shifted. Beyond the Empire, this galaxy was home to countless factions. Rebellion cells scattered across star systems, Mandalorian clans with their rigid codes, new criminal syndicates manipulating trade routes and mercenary fleets that answered to no one. Each presented both an opportunity and a threat. The young Jedi was a curiosity, but the larger chessboard awaited, and Magneto intended to see how the pieces moved before committing fully. Above the planet, orbital communication arrays still relayed scattered reports. Imperial commanders struggled to coordinate, their voices breaking over interference generated by Magneto's subtle manipulation of metallic infrastructure. He could hear the tactical chatter, sense the desperation, and feel the strain in every officer's movements. The Empire relied on discipline and hierarchy, yet every chain of command was being subtly bent, disrupted, rendered unpredictable. Precision, he realized, was the key. Chaos was effective only when controlled. Without control, it became merely destructive. He began his next experiment, probing the rebellion. Sensors detected a small group of X-Wings patrolling the outer orbit, reporting unusual magnetic disturbances interfering with navigation. Magneto extended his field, gently tugging at the metallic hulls of the starfighters. Pilots struggled to maintain course, their instincts telling them something was wrong, yet unable to identify the source. With a thought, Magneto redirected their flight paths, herding them in a circular formation above Coruscant, like fish in a tank. He tested limits, learning how quickly small craft could respond, how much force was required to override pilot input, and how the force might influence their reactions indirectly. Meanwhile, on the ground, Mandalorian operatives had taken note of the disturbance. But a contingent of warriors in Beskar armor observed the suspended debris and disrupted Imperial patrols with cautious interest. Magneto's presence intrigued them, not because they feared the Empire's response, but because a figure capable of bending metal to his will represented both opportunity and challenge. He could provide a new ally, a weapon, or a threat. Mandalorians were not pawns, they were players. And Magneto recognized this immediately, sensing their rigid honor codes, their tactical precision, and their readiness to strike if provoked. The underworld, too, began to stir. Hut operatives, Black Sun agents, and independent mercenaries monitored the anomaly through eyes, sensors, and hearsay. In a galaxy where power was often currency, Magneto's abilities represented untold leverage. The Syndicate sent emissaries to gauge the situation. Were they facing a potential partner, a tool to be exploited, or a danger that required elimination? Magneto, observing these probes indirectly through metal structures and communications relays, decided to remain inscrutable. Patience would yield more information than rash engagement. Within Coruscant's lower levels, the young Jedi pressed onward. They had managed to disrupt an Imperial maintenance hub, temporarily severing some communication and sensor networks. Yet they sensed Magneto's awareness of their actions. The Force provided glimpses, ripples of magnetic intent, that revealed his calculations without exposing the full extent of his control. The Jedi realized that direct confrontation was futile. Strategy, observation, and indirect action were now necessary. They became a test of ingenuity against a master of metal. Magneto allowed the Jedi's interference, noting subtle adjustments they made to protect civilians and redirect small metallic hazards. These actions, though minor in the scale of his control, provided critical insight. Force-sensitive beings could influence his field in limited ways, but only through intuition and indirect manipulation. Every strike, every block, every defensive maneuver contributed to his understanding of force-based tactics. He cataloged each movement, storing it mentally for later analysis, how Jedi adapted, anticipated, and reacted when confronted with a power they could not fully grasp. Above, Imperial commanders debated desperation measures. "Deploy the Inquisitors," one officer suggested, voice tight with frustration. We cannot allow this anomaly to undermine fleet morale and the Emperor's authority." Vader, listening, considered the proposal carefully. The anomaly's intelligence and adaptability made conventional Force-sensitive enforcers less effective. Yet their understanding of the Force might allow them to interact in ways he could not. Sending Inquisitors would reveal more of the anomaly's limits, but also risk their lives. Vader weighed the options, calculating probabilities with a precision that only he could. In orbit, Magneto began integrating multiple factions into his observations. He manipulated X-Wings subtly, nudged Star Destroyers into defensive postures, and adjusted debris fields in lower Coruscant levels, all simultaneously. Each action provided data, how quickly Imperial and Rebellion forces could respond, how coordination broke down under pressure, and how civilians adapted to environments manipulated by his field. Observation was key. Direct confrontation could come later. For now, control through indirect pressure was sufficient. The Mandalorians made their move. A small strike team descended, testing the floating debris for weaknesses and searching for any potential ally within Magneto's controlled zone. They did not attack directly. Their code prohibited rash action without clear information. Magneto, sensing their presence through the subtle magnetic signature of Beskar armor and weaponry, allowed them to navigate the field. They probed, measured, and retreated without confrontation, providing additional insight into the galaxy's tactical players. Meanwhile, a small faction of rebel operatives attempted to breach Coruscant's lower defenses to evacuate civilians. Magneto's field guided debris to form temporary corridors, subtly testing the rebels' adaptability. They moved with caution, aware that their enemy could manipulate every metallic object around them. Yet their ingenuity and collaboration allowed them to succeed partially, offering further insight into group dynamics and the interplay between intelligence and raw power. Even the young Jedi, sensing the increasing complexity of the battlefield, made a morally significant choice. They could have abandoned civilians to focus on personal survival or direct engagement. Instead, they redirected their limited control over small metal objects to shield civilians and facilitate safe passage, but knowing that every delay allowed Magneto to continue testing his limits. In doing so, they demonstrated a key principle. Moral choice could influence tactical outcomes, even against an overwhelmingly powerful adversary. Magneto noted this, intrigued by the interplay of morality and strategy in beings so physically limited compared to him. The Empire escalated further. Additional Star Destroyers were brought into orbit, coordinated with ground assaults and anti-metal technology experiments. Magneto observed each adjustment, subtly redirecting, bending, and neutralizing the most dangerous threats, while leaving minor responses intact. Each reaction provided more data. How far the Empire could stretch its forces, where coordination failed, and which variables could be exploited. By now, Coruscant was a living laboratory of power, strategy, and morality. Magneto orchestrated chaos with precision, testing the limits of metal, force-sensitive interference, and factional coordination. He had begun to catalog patterns, which factions reacted predictably, which required indirect manipulation, and which could offer opportunities for alliances or exploitation. The galaxy's complexity fascinated him, offering layers of challenge far beyond any battlefield he had encountered in his own world. As orbital star destroyers hovered in hypnotic alignment, the Mandalorians retreated, the rebels maneuvered cautiously, and the young Jedi continued to act with ingenuity and moral clarity. Magneto allowed each movement, observing, calculating, and adjusting. His control extended across multiple factions, multiple layers of influence, and multiple levels of strategy. The Empire remained formidable, but the galaxy itself, its inhabitants, structures, and factions, had become a canvas for his power. Finally, Magneto paused. For the first time, he considered the implications. The Empire was reactive, the Rebellion adaptive, the Mandalorians honorable, the Jedi morally driven. Each faction added complexity, resistance, and unpredictability to the unfolding scenario. Yet none could fully challenge his dominance. He had tested limits, observed behaviors, and forced adaptation without revealing the full extent of his power. The chessboard was set, the pieces were in motion, and the next phase, the confrontation, the decisive demonstration, was inevitable. The young Jedi watched him from a distance, sensing a shift in his focus. They realized that Magneto's next move would not be a simple attack. It would be a strategic escalation, a test of morality, intelligence, and adaptability across multiple factions. Coruscant itself had become the stage for a contest of mastery over both metal and the will of those who lived within its layers. Magneto extended his awareness further, sensing the faint ripples of distant factions beginning to take notice. Rebellion cells coordinating across hyperspace, Mandalorian enclaves discussing the anomaly, and underworld operatives weighing potential alliances or threats. Every player had a choice, every decision a consequence. The galaxy was now a living experiment, and he was both observer and conductor. As the sun began to set over Coruscant's upper levels, casting the suspended debris into jagged, twisting silhouettes, the Magneto allowed a single thought to ripple outward through his magnetic field. The galaxy is mine to test. Let them reveal their limits. The Star Destroyers aligned, debris spun, and every faction braced for the inevitable escalation. The stage was set, the pieces in motion, and the game had only just begun. By the third day of Coruscant's suspended chaos, the city had become an uncanny landscape of twisted metal, floating debris, and awe-stricken observers. Star Destroyers hovered like titans under Magneto's will, each hull vibrating subtly in response to his thoughts. Street-level chaos unfolded beneath them, yet no lives were needlessly destroyed. Magneto had learned that control was far more effective than annihilation. Fear, awe, and inevitability were stronger tools than mere force. Imperial command, however, had reached the limits of patience. The Emperor's enforcers, inquisitors, admirals, and strategic planners gathered in the Executor's command chamber. Darth Vader stood at the center, a towering presence of menace and focus. "The anomaly is no ordinary foe," Vader said, his tone measured but darkly urgent. "It anticipates every move, controls every weapon, and renders our forces irrelevant. Yet it is not omnipotent. We will test its limits." Vader's plan was bold and precise. A combined operation would strike simultaneously from orbit, the city surface, and hyperspace ambushes beyond the planet. Several Star Destroyers would act as decoys, drawing Magneto's attention while smaller, faster vessels carried targeted explosives designed to disrupt magnetic fields. Force-sensitive Inquisitors would attempt to interfere, using precognition to anticipate Magneto's manipulations. It was the Empire's best attempt at overcoming unpredictability with coordination. But Magneto had already sensed it. He allowed the initial orbital decoy maneuvers. Star Destroyers shifted, weapons misfiring slightly, shields twitching, in drawing him into subtle engagement. He noted patterns, small fleets moving predictably, larger ships attempting evasive maneuvers, and the Empire's reliance on chain-of-command tactics. Each movement reinforced his earlier observations. The Empire could execute massive operations, but adaptation was slower than he expected. At street level, the Mandalorians made a more assertive approach. A small strike team in full Beskar armor moved with calculated precision, aiming to intercept critical Imperial support points. Magneto observed them without interference, intrigued by their discipline and code. They did not seek conflict for its own sake. They sought results. Their moral clarity and strategic precision were a reminder that not all challenges in this galaxy could be dominated by sheer power alone. The young Jedi remained active. With every movement, they countered minor elements of Magneto's field, shielding civilians and redirecting smaller debris. Their actions were tactically effective, but limited in scale. Magneto allowed them room to operate, noting how moral choice shaped tactical outcomes. The Jedi's restraint, focus on protecting innocence, and improvisational skill made them a unique variable, one worth studying before full-scale confrontation. Magneto shifted his attention outward, sensing hyperspace signatures. Rebellion cells were beginning to mobilize, responding to reports of Coruscant's crisis. Small freighters, armed with limited weapons, maneuvered cautiously toward the planet. Magneto extended his field subtly, nudging metallic hulls into formation, aligning debris to create natural choke points. The rebels' attempts to intervene were partially thwarted, not by brute force but by precise, controlled obstruction. His mind catalogued every tactic, evasive maneuvers, improvisation, and coordination under stress. Imperial orbital forces escalated. A squadron of TIE interceptors attempted synchronized flanking maneuvers, while Star Destroyers concentrated fire on points Magneto had temporarily abandoned. He responded with subtle redirection, tilting turbo lasers slightly off-target, adjusting shields, and inducing minor misalignments in engines. The battle was a demonstration. Overwhelming power on one side met with precise control on the other. The outcome was not destruction, but proof. Magneto's control over metal, strategy, and adaptability was unmatched in this context. Then came the Inquisitors. The 4 Force-sensitive agents descended from orbit, their lightsabers igniting as they sought to engage. Magneto sensed the difference immediately. Their connection to the Force allowed them to anticipate some fluctuations in metal and machinery. Unlike conventional Imperial forces, they introduced variables he could not fully calculate. Still, his field was extensive, and he responded strategically. Debris shifted in subtle defensive patterns, creating barriers and obstacles that tested their abilities without causing unnecessary casualties. A tense engagement unfolded. The Inquisitors attempted coordinated attacks, anticipating his manipulation patterns and moving to disrupt magnetic flows. Magneto adjusted, subtly isolating pieces of metal to create temporary restraints, diverting weapons and vehicles into harmless collisions. But the young Jedi joined from below, leveraging the Force to protect civilians while subtly countering Inquisitor movements. The 3 forces, Magneto, the Inquisitors, and the Jedi, created a complex, dynamic battlefield. The Empire attempted a new tactic, deploying anti-metallic explosives across strategic points, designed to weaken Magneto's control. Yet even these innovations fell short. He detected the magnetic distortions in advance, stabilizing the surrounding metals to absorb or deflect the impact. Only minor debris shifted unpredictably, giving the impression of vulnerability while leaving his central influence intact. Patience, Magneto reminded himself, was as essential as power. Meanwhile, civilian response added another layer. Some attempted to flee via airborne transport. Others aided in improvising barricades. Every action affected the field in subtle ways. Magneto observed how intelligence and ingenuity, human, alien, or Force-guided, introduced variables that brute strength alone could not predict. This was a critical lesson. In this galaxy, power had to be tempered by observation and adaptation. The Mandalorians, noticing the Empire's escalation, positioned themselves strategically around debris fields and critical junctions. Magneto sensed their approach and allowed limited interactions. They engaged Imperial forces with tactical precision, exploiting vulnerabilities he had subtly highlighted. It was not direct collaboration, but an implicit coordination. He learned from their methods, disciplined, focused, and ruthless efficiency, tempered by honor. In the orbital layer, one of the Star Destroyers attempted a desperate maneuver, a direct dive into Coruscant's lower levels, intending to crush urban sections and force Magneto to respond reactively. He lifted the vessel with absolute control, hovering it mid-air, adjusting its tilt, and creating a subtle oscillation that neutralized its destructive trajectory. The city beneath remained largely unharmed, though debris shifted to highlight the display. Civilians, soldiers, and the Jedi alike witnessed a demonstration of absolute command, power restrained by strategy rather than chaos. Vader, observant from the Executor, recognized a limitation. Magneto's power was vast, but it required a medium. He manipulated metals, anything ferrous or conductive, but non-metallic materials. The Force itself and organic adaptability remained partially beyond his full control. And Vader considered exploiting this. Coordinated attacks focusing on organic resistance, Force interference, and non-metallic technology. Yet even here, Magneto's anticipation and patience made straightforward assault hazardous. The Jedi, sensing opportunity, attempted a strategic strike, dislodging a critical conduit supporting part of Magneto's orbital manipulation. Magneto countered, redirecting smaller metallic conduits to absorb impact and stabilize larger structures. Their effort, while clever, revealed the gap between Force-influenced ingenuity and raw manipulation of massive metal objects. Still, Magneto logged every reaction, storing the knowledge for potential future engagement. Simultaneously, Rebel reinforcements arrived via hyperspace, skirting orbit to avoid direct engagement. Magneto extended subtle influence, nudging their formation to test coordination under unexpected conditions. Freighters collided with debris fields. Pilots struggled to maintain composure, yet they adapted quickly. Magneto noted how decentralized leadership allowed more flexible responses than imperial hierarchy, a critical observation for future strategy. Hours passed in this suspended battle, a delicate dance between power, morality, and intelligence. Magneto did not strike to kill, did not destroy without necessity. Every move was calculated, measured, and precise, forcing factions to reveal their patterns, weaknesses, and strengths. The Empire had firepower, the Rebels had ingenuity, Mandalorians had discipline, Force-sensitive beings had adaptability, and Magneto had control over the fundamental building blocks of their tools, the metal around them. As night fell over Coruscant's upper spires, casting jagged shadows across the city's floating debris, Magneto extended his awareness beyond immediate combat. He sensed distant factions mobilizing, potential alliances forming, and enemies reassessing the threat. The chessboard was expanding. Every player, Imperial, Rebel, Mandalorian, or Underworld operative, had revealed something about their capabilities. Each had provided data, insight, and opportunity. And yet the decisive confrontation had not yet come. Magneto had tested limits, observed behavior, and orchestrated chaos without unnecessary destruction. He had demonstrated dominance without revealing the full extent of his power. The next phase, he realized, would demand more than observation. It would require a decisive strike, and a demonstration of both capability and consequence that could not be ignored. In the final moments of the night, he allowed the orbital star destroyers to realign into a single dramatic formation above Coruscant. Debris and smaller vessels moved in precise arcs, creating a visual signal to all factions. The anomaly was in command. The rules had changed, and the galaxy would need to respond, or be reshaped entirely. Dawn broke over Coruscant with a fractured light, scattering through jagged clouds of suspended debris. The city below remained a surreal landscape, streets twisted with metallic fragments hovering in impossible formations, star destroyers aligned above like silent, hovering gods, and citizens frozen between terror and awe. Magneto's will held every element in delicate suspension. He had tested, observed, and catalogued. But now the time for passive experimentation had passed. The next stage demanded action. He began by subtly shifting the orbital star destroyers, Their massive hulls rotated in precise arcs, reflecting sunlight across lower levels of the city. Debris cascaded around them, metallic shards spinning like clockwork gears. The effect was hypnotic, disorienting Imperial forces and civilians alike. Yet there was a purpose beyond spectacle. He intended to probe the reactions of every faction simultaneously. Each subtle oscillation forced recalculations, exposing hesitation, miscoordination, and weakness. The Empire responded. Darth Vader, now fully engaged, had deployed elite Inquisitors in synchronized ground and orbital strikes. Their goal was to confront Magneto directly, bypassing the distractions of debris and civilian interference. Vader's presence in the field amplified their confidence and coordination. They moved with deadly precision, predicting Magneto's manipulations and attempting to exploit what they believed were the limits of his field. But Magneto had anticipated escalation. He did not wait for the Inquisitor's attack to unfold. He adapted in real time. Debris shifted underfoot. The metallic structures subtly redirected attacks mid-flight, and smaller pieces formed barriers, diverting incoming lightsaber strikes. Orbital star destroyers tilted and rotated to reflect turbolaser blasts harmlessly into the void, demonstrating absolute control over weapons, vessels, and urban structures. Yet even as he displayed overwhelming power, he was calculating, learning from every movement, noting every tactic employed by the Empire. At street level, the Mandalorians became an active variable. Their strike team had regrouped, observing the battlefield for critical openings. Magneto detected them through the subtle magnetic signature of Beskar, which responded differently to his field than conventional metals. He allowed them limited freedom, using their movements to gauge strategic thinking and coordination without granting them direct advantage. The Mandalorians, disciplined and methodical, exploited debris corridors and environmental hazards to strike at Imperial positions, drawing attention away from civilians and forcing the Inquisitors into reactive positions. The young Jedi, still agile and determined, maneuvered among the chaos. Using the Force, they created small but critical interventions, redirecting falling debris to protect civilians, pushing attackers off balance, and probing Magneto's influence with subtle manipulations of small metal fragments. Magneto allowed these intrusions, intrigued by the interplay of morality and strategy. He noted that ingenuity and ethical choice could shape outcomes even under overwhelming control, a factor he had not encountered with mortal adversaries in his home world. In orbit, rebel reinforcements arrived via hyperspace, skirting orbital debris and Imperial patrols. Magneto extended subtle influence, nudging metallic components in their path, testing reaction times and tactical improvisation. Freighters spun narrowly past drifting starship fragments, pilots shouting in frustration as their maneuvers became increasingly complex. Yet the rebels adapted quickly, demonstrating decentralized leadership, teamwork, and creativity under pressure. Every successful maneuver was another variable catalogued in Magneto's mind. The Empire escalated further. One of the Star Destroyers attempted a kamikaze-style dive into the city's lower levels, aiming to crush infrastructure and force Magneto into reactive measures. With controlled precision, he lifted the vessel, redirecting it into a slow, hovering orbit while subtly tilting engines and turbolaser arrays to neutralize offensive capability. Civilians below remained largely unharmed, but the psychological impact was profound. He had demonstrated the ability to bend even the most massive threats without fully committing to destruction. Vader, sensing both opportunity and danger, prepared to engage personally. He extended his presence through the Force, reaching for Magneto's intent, probing the anomaly's connection to metal, energy, and telekinetic influence. The Sith Lord recognized an unprecedented challenge. This was not a Force-sensitive being, yet its control over the environment rivaled or exceeded anything he had encountered. Standard lightsaber techniques and Force attacks were insufficient. Precision, patience, and tactical ingenuity would be required. Magneto, aware of Vader's presence, tested limits further. He caused a massive wave of metallic debris to form a defensive barrier around a key section of Coruscant's lower levels, effectively separating the Imperial strike force from the civilian population. At the same time, he manipulated a network of street-level vehicles and structural elements to create a dynamic battlefield, one where every movement was either an obstacle or a conduit for his influence. His power was absolute, yet restrained, a living demonstration of strategy over chaos. The Mandalorians pressed forward. Using their knowledge of urban combat, they maneuvered through debris corridors, striking at exposed Imperial units and drawing fire away from civilians. Magneto observed their methods, and noting how disciplined, tactical players could exploit gaps in his control without directly challenging his dominance. Their actions revealed a critical lesson. While raw power could dominate, adaptability and ethical precision introduced unpredictability that even he had to account for. The young Jedi attempted a daring maneuver. Leaping across floating debris, they directed a stream of metal fragments to disarm a group of stormtroopers attempting a flanking maneuver. Magneto allowed this, fascinated by their ingenuity and moral clarity. Each calculated risk, each protective action, added depth to his understanding of strategic variables. It was not enough to manipulate metal. The human or alien element had to be considered. Rebel pilots attempted orbital strikes, firing proton torpedoes and ion cannons at strategic points. And Magneto subtly redirected each projectile, adjusting metal conduits, debris, and hull fragments to deflect attacks safely into open space. The display of precision was breathtaking. He had achieved control over orbital, atmospheric, and street-level threats simultaneously. Imperial commanders, frustrated and alarmed, struggled to adjust to an opponent who could not be directly assaulted. As the battle continued, Magneto orchestrated a new strategy: divide, confuse, and control without destroying. Debris was shifted to create corridors, traps, and barriers, forcing Imperial units, rebel forces, and Mandalorian operatives to interact in unpredictable ways. Each faction revealed weaknesses, adaptability, and decision-making patterns. Civilians, Jedi, and independent operatives moved through these shifting pathways, creating layers of observation that Magneto catalogued meticulously. The Inquisitors, sensing an opportunity, attempted a coordinated strike against one of Magneto's key control points, a floating assembly of Star Destroyer components near the city's core. He responded with near-instantaneous precision, redirecting smaller metallic elements to block attacks, while subtly adjusting larger structures to counter potential Force interference. The confrontation became a study in simultaneous control and adaptation, Magneto manipulating hundreds of metallic objects, Inquisitors attempting to exploit gaps, Jedi intervening ethically, and Mandalorians applying tactical pressure, all within a single dynamic battlefield. Imperial Command attempted a new approach, focusing on non-metallic assaults to bypass Magneto's influence. Explosive charges, the energy-based attacks, and force-powered strikes were coordinated, targeting vulnerable points in infrastructure and ships. Magneto adapted again, redirecting debris and vehicles to absorb impact, stabilizing orbital star destroyers, and maintaining control over smaller structures. Non-metallic materials, he noted, posed challenges, but did not prevent the broader mastery he had achieved. Hours passed in this suspended engagement. Coruscant had become a theater of strategy, morality, and overwhelming power. Magneto had demonstrated both dominance and restraint, teaching the galaxy that control could be exercised without total destruction. The Empire's massive firepower, the Rebels' ingenuity, the Mandalorians' precision, and the Jedi's moral decision-making all contributed to a living laboratory of observation, that each faction had revealed patterns, strengths, and weaknesses. As night descended, Magneto paused, allowing the battlefield to stabilize. Orbital star destroyers aligned into a singular imposing formation. Debris spun in orchestrated arcs below, and civilians began cautiously moving through safer corridors. Mandalorians regrouped, rebel pilots assessed damage, and the young Jedi observed from above, sensing the depth of Magneto's control and strategic genius. He extended his awareness across the planet and into hyperspace, sensing distant rebellion cells, underworld operatives, and potential allies. The game had escalated beyond Coruscant. The galaxy itself was now a canvas, a field of study, and a potential target for influence. Magneto had demonstrated mastery, patience, and restraint. But the decisive moment, when observation turned to deliberate consequence, was yet to come. Finally, he allowed a single deliberate shift. The largest star destroyer in orbit tilted slightly, creating a controlled cascade of debris that swept across the city like a metallic wave. Civilians were shielded by corridors he maintained. Imperial units were forced into reactive positions, and every faction's adaptability was tested simultaneously. The message was clear. Magneto had control, the rules had changed, and any miscalculation could be catastrophic. In that moment, the galaxy understood a truth it had never faced before. A being capable of bending metal to his will, observing, adapting, and calculating, could challenge not only the Empire but the very structure of power itself. The stage was set for the next phase, where strategy would give way to decisive action, and consequences would ripple across systems, factions, and the entire galactic order. Coruscant trembled as the first light of dawn fractured through the floating debris, glinting off suspended metal in an eerie kaleidoscope of reflected sunlight. Star destroyers hovered like colossal predators above the city, their hulls aligned in a formation Magneto had imposed with absolute precision. The streets, though partially cleared, remained labyrinthine corridors of twisted metal, overturned vehicles, and floating fragments, a controlled chaos that left Imperial commanders, Mandalorian operatives, rebel pilots, and Jedi alike struggling to navigate. Magneto sensed the approaching culmination of his campaign. The Empire would commit everything to remove him from the battlefield. The rebels would attempt a final, desperate intervention, and the Mandalorians would strike wherever opportunity intersected with honor. The young Jedi, that he's still alive and resilient, had learned much in the past 2 days. But the ultimate test was imminent. Vader, standing aboard the Executor, projected his presence through the Force across the battlefield. The Emperor's signature malevolence lingered on the edge of perception, but Palpatine had allowed Vader discretion. The Sith Lord understood that brute force alone could not subdue Magneto. Finesse, anticipation, and lethal precision were required. He had called upon every Inquisitor, coordinated orbital bombardments, and aligned the Empire's remaining fleet for a decisive strike. Magneto, aware of the Empire's mobilization, extended his awareness. Every ferrous object in the city and orbit, star destroyers, ships, vehicles, structural beams, responded instantly to subtle mental commands. He did not strike indiscriminately. A destruction was a tool, not a first resort. Instead, he prepared the battlefield to maximize strategic advantage and minimize collateral loss. Civilian corridors were stabilized, floating debris formed choke points, and star destroyers hovered with calibrated threat, enough to intimidate, disorient, and control the Imperial forces. The initial Imperial assault came in waves. Squadrons of TIE interceptors dove through twisting debris corridors, their pilots executing synchronized maneuvers intended to overwhelm any reactive system. Magneto redirected metallic elements subtly, causing minor collisions and forcing formations to break apart. Turbo-laser fire ricocheted harmlessly off suspended metal fragments, creating controlled chaos that distracted without harming civilians. Every move and every miscalculation by the Empire was observed and logged. On the streets, Mandalorian operatives seized openings created by Magneto's manipulations. They struck at Imperial positions with lethal efficiency, exploiting gaps in defenses while respecting civilian safety. Magneto allowed their maneuvers, observing tactical precision in real time. He noted that disciplined, honor-bound factions could exploit environmental advantages effectively, a critical consideration should he need allies or wish to manipulate outcomes subtly. The young Jedi attempted an orbital descent, guiding small metal fragments with the Force to disable critical Imperial communications nodes. Magneto detected the subtle intrusion immediately and adapted, redirecting debris to absorb the impact while leaving the Jedi unscathed. Their moral and tactical choice fascinated him. Here was a being operating under strict ethical constraints, achieving real effects despite limited resources and overwhelming odds. Vader entered the battlefield personally, his lightsaber igniting with a hiss that echoed across the metallic landscape. He moved with the calm inevitability of a predator, projecting the Force to anticipate Magneto's manipulations. "Your control is impressive," Vader said, his voice carrying through the Force. "But it is finite. All things fall before the dark side." Magneto regarded the Sith Lord, weighing the statement. He recognized the difference between Force-sensitive beings and ordinary humans. Vader could anticipate patterns, probe intent, and exploit psychological vulnerability. Yet Magneto's understanding of metal, energy, and kinetic influence gave him an advantage few Force users could predict. He allowed the Star Destroyers to descend slightly, creating a visual and psychological weight over Vader's contingent while shifting smaller metallic elements into defensive barriers. The confrontation became immediate. Vader struck first, sending a wave of force energy aimed at disrupting Magneto's central field. Metal vibrated, suspended fragments quivered, and Star Destroyers adjusted mid-orbit. Magneto countered instantly, weaving a magnetic barrier that absorbed and redirected energy harmlessly into the void. The clash was not brute force. It was a precise dance of control, anticipation, and adaptation. Each opponent tested the limits of the other. In the streets, Imperial troops attempted to flank, but Mandalorian operatives anticipated the movement, striking with tactical efficiency. Rebel pilots engaged orbital targets, firing proton torpedoes that were deftly redirected by Magneto's subtle manipulations. Civilians, guided through safe corridors, watched from the sidelines, witnessing an unprecedented display of power, control, and strategy. Vader pressed harder, extending his force connection and attempting to manipulate the environment to disrupt Magneto's field. Metallic conduits shifted unpredictably, debris collided with precision, and Star Destroyers rocked in micro-adjustments. Magneto countered, isolating key metallic structures and amplifying others, creating cascading layers of defense. Every action Vader took revealed patterns. Every maneuver catalogued for potential exploitation. The young Jedi joined in the direct confrontation, guiding small metal fragments and disarming Imperial squads. Their moral choice to intervene, even in the face of overwhelming power, added an unpredictable element. Magneto allowed their influence, noting that even minor deviations introduced meaningful complexity into an otherwise controlled environment. This combination of ethics, adaptability, and tactical skill was new, an unfamiliar variable that made the confrontation far more engaging. Mandalorians pressed the attack, engaging Imperial forces in tactical strikes while avoiding civilian zones. Beskar blades clanged against debris, detonations echoed off metallic structures, and the streets became a symphony of disciplined combat. Magneto observed, occasionally adjusting pathways and barriers to guide outcomes without direct interference. Each faction's skill, morality, and improvisation shaped the battlefield, reinforcing a critical realization: raw power alone did not ensure victory. Orbital bombardments escalated. Star Destroyers fired turbolasers, ion cannons, and experimental anti-metal projectiles. Debris shifted dynamically under Magneto's command, creating shields and reflecting fire into empty space. The largest Star Destroyer hovered in a deliberate tilt, creating cascading metallic corridors that forced Imperial ships into restricted flight paths. The spectacle was overwhelming, psychologically and strategically. Imperial morale faltered under the realization that conventional tactics were ineffective. Vader, sensing a potential opening, attempted a concentrated force strike, aiming to destabilize a central metallic conduit supporting Magneto's orbital control. In response, Magneto executed a simultaneous redirection. Smaller metallic fragments absorbed the strike while the main structure remained steady. The display was dazzling, a combination of sheer power, strategy, and adaptive reflexes. Vader's expression beneath his mask betrayed respect and concern. This was not a foe to be underestimated. Magneto then escalated offensively. With a subtle thought, he caused the largest Star Destroyer to descend slightly, shifting its mass to pin Imperial forces into controlled choke points. Metallic debris followed suit, forming barriers and conduits that restricted movement while avoiding civilian casualties. The Mandalorians capitalized on the created openings, striking at exposed Imperial units. Rebel pilots executed precision attacks, and targeting weapons arrays that Magneto had deliberately exposed to measure response. The climactic confrontation reached its peak when Vader attempted a direct engagement. He moved through corridors of floating debris, lightsaber igniting, force projecting energy to manipulate metal. Magneto countered instantly, isolating metallic elements and redirecting kinetic energy with precision. Each strike from Vader prompted immediate adaptive response. Sparks flew, Star Destroyers quivered, and smaller debris collided with explosive force, but all within controlled bounds. The young Jedi attempted a combined strike with Mandalorian forces. Metal fragments were directed to disable key Imperial weapons systems, while ground operatives engaged stormtrooper units. Magneto allowed partial success, observing how coordinated ethical tactics and battlefield improvisation could challenge even overwhelming control. Each success and failure was catalogued, building a comprehensive understanding of faction behavior under extreme pressure. Finally, Magneto executed a decisive maneuver. The Central Star Destroyer tilted dramatically, creating a sweeping cascade of debris across key Imperial formations. Rebel and Mandalorian forces were guided into advantageous positions, civilians shielded, and the Empire forced into reactive postures. Vader, realizing the futility of conventional assault, paused, acknowledging that Magneto's mastery over metal and battlefield dynamics had surpassed all prior expectations. The aftermath of Section 9 left the battlefield in suspended tension. The Empire was not destroyed, but humiliated, its tactical superiority nullified. Rebels and Mandalorians had survived, demonstrating adaptability and skill. The young Jedi remained alive, an ethical counterbalance within the conflict. Magneto had proven absolute mastery over the immediate environment, strategic foresight, and adaptive intelligence. But he had done so without unnecessary destruction, demonstrating a measured, calculated philosophy of control. In that moment, every faction understood a fundamental truth. The rules had changed. Magneto was not simply a powerful being. He was a strategist, an observer, and a force capable of reshaping the balance of power across the galaxy. Every decision, every tactic, and every ethical choice had consequences. Coruscant had been tested, the Empire humbled, and a new equilibrium awaited, one shaped by intelligence, morality, and unrivaled control. Coruscant's skyline remained fractured, yet for the first time since Magneto's arrival, there was a tense calm. Orbital star destroyers hovered in hypnotic alignment, their massive hulls reflecting the rising suns. Metallic debris floated midair in choreographed arcs, forming both barriers and corridors, a living testament to Magneto's control. He surveyed the city with clinical precision, analyzing every faction, every decision, and every potential weakness. The Empire had adapted, the rebels had improvised, the Mandalorians had demonstrated tactical brilliance, and the Jedi continued to operate with ethical determination. The stage was set. Magneto's mind extended further than ever before, probing the city's infrastructure, its fleets, and its populace simultaneously. Inhabitants moved cautiously through corridors of suspended metal. Be aware that any misstep could trigger unpredictable consequences. Imperial officers, constrained by hierarchy, yet desperate for results, communicated frantically with orbital commanders. They were learning, but under pressure. Even the most disciplined leadership faltered. Magneto noted the patterns, cataloging human behavior under duress and cross-referencing it with tactical response. Darth Vader, having assessed Magneto's control, took decisive action. He led a contingent of Inquisitors in a coordinated strike aimed at severing critical metallic conduits, feeding Magneto's orbital control. They moved with precision, using the Force to anticipate the magnetic currents that guided debris and vessels alike. Yet every maneuver was countered subtly. Smaller debris shifted to intercept. Star destroyers adjusted in micro-arcs, and energy beams were subtly deflected. Magneto's awareness of every physical and tactical variable made even coordinated strikes appear chaotic and ineffective. Meanwhile, the Mandalorians, recognizing an opportunity, engaged the Empire's forces with disciplined aggression. Using the floating debris to their advantage, they struck from unexpected angles, drawing fire away from civilians and creating openings for rebel operatives. Magneto allowed these interactions, intrigued by their honor-bound tactics and disciplined improvisation. These small victories for the Mandalorians revealed additional data points: how disciplined, honor-driven factions could exploit environmental factors without challenging Magneto's overarching control. The young Jedi, observing from above, decided to escalate their interference. Using the Force, they manipulated smaller metallic fragments to disrupt Imperial communications nodes and laser turrets. Magneto allowed these interventions, noting the interplay of morality and tactical ingenuity. The Jedi's ability to make ethical choices that produced practical results fascinated him. Control over metal was immense, but influence over living decision-makers was another layer of complexity entirely. Rebel reinforcements continued to arrive, skirting orbital debris and landing near strategic urban areas. Magneto subtly adjusted debris corridors, creating controlled bottlenecks and tactical challenges. Freighters were nudged into positions where pilots had to adapt rapidly or risk collision. These adjustments were not attacks, but tests, forcing the rebels to demonstrate coordination, improvisation, and resilience under pressure. Every successful maneuver was another variable stored in Magneto's expanding strategic database. The Empire, growing increasingly desperate, deployed experimental anti-metal weapons. Magnetic pulse bombs and specialized ion disruptors were detonated near critical orbital points. Debris convulsed violently, star destroyers shuddered, and smaller craft tumbled. Yet Magneto absorbed and redirected these forces, demonstrating not just raw power, but adaptive strategy. Each attack, while designed to counter him, only provided further insight into the Empire's technological and tactical limitations. At street level, civilians had begun to grasp the scale of what they were witnessing. Floating debris moved in patterns that, while dangerous, created new pathways through the city. Some daring citizens navigated these corridors to aid others, improvising with the limited tools at hand. Magneto allowed these movements, calculating how non-combatants adapted under pressure. He noted that even unarmed, morally driven players could introduce variables that affected the balance of power. Small, unpredictable influences that demanded attention. The Mandalorians, sensing a strategic moment, attempted a direct strike on one of the Empire's command outposts. Their armor clanged against metal debris as they moved through corridors shaped by Magneto's field. Every step, every maneuver was precise, tactical, and disciplined. Magneto observed but did not intervene, allowing them to exploit gaps he had deliberately left to assess their methods and effectiveness. Their actions forced Imperial forces to divide attention, creating openings for further experimentation and observation. Darth Vader, realizing the Mandalorians' significance, redirected his Inquisitors to counter their movements. Force powers clashed with metallic manipulation, sparks flying as lightsabers met debris in unpredictable arcs. Magneto responded with precision, isolating metal conduits to block attacks, while subtly maintaining his orbital and street-level control. The confrontation became a layered chess match. Debris, star destroyers, energy weapons, and force-sensitive combatants intertwined in a complex dance of adaptation and strategy. The young Jedi made a critical moral choice. Observing civilians trapped under unstable debris, they risked their position to divert metal fragments and create a safe corridor. Magneto, sensing the ethical intent, they allowed the maneuver to succeed while noting the broader implications. Moral agency could produce effective tactical outcomes even under overwhelming control. The Jedi's action forced Imperial units into reactive positions, indirectly supporting Mandalorian and Rebel operations. Rebel pilots, adapting to the shifting environment, executed orbital strikes designed to disable critical Imperial weapons arrays without collateral damage. Magneto subtly redirected metallic elements to ensure these attacks were partially successful, but did not compromise the larger structure of control. His goal was observation and testing, not destruction. Every action, every adaptation, every tactical choice provided data on how multiple factions could interact under extreme pressure and manipulation. The Empire's desperation reached a peak. Vader considered a bold gambit, using the Force to disrupt Magneto's perception and attempt a direct physical strike. Yet even here, Magneto's anticipation and control made a frontal assault hazardous. He had accounted for energy flows, metal conductivity, and even force manipulation to an extraordinary degree. Vader's attack, if attempted, would require flawless timing and coordination, a challenge that even the Sith Lord recognized as formidable. Hours passed in this suspended battlefield. Coruscant had become a living laboratory, a test of power, strategy, and morality. Magneto's control extended across orbital, street-level, and urban infrastructure simultaneously. He'd observed every faction, cataloged behavior under extreme stress, and demonstrated the capacity for precision, restraint, and adaptation. The Empire, Rebels, and Mandalorians, and Jedi had all contributed insights, weaknesses, and unexpected variables. As night fell, Magneto executed a final test for the day, a controlled shift of the largest star destroyer in orbit, tilting it to create a sweeping cascade of metallic debris across lower Coruscant. The effect was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Civilians were guided through safe corridors, Imperial forces were forced into reactive positions, and every faction's adaptability was measured. Magneto's control was absolute, yet calculated, restrained, and deliberate. In this moment, the young Jedi realized the full extent of the challenge. Magneto was not merely a master of metal, but a strategist, a philosopher of control, and a student of behavior. His influence extended beyond the physical into the ethical and tactical realms. Every choice, But every maneuver and every decision was observed, catalogued, and incorporated into his understanding of the galaxy. Magneto, observing the responses from every faction, extended his awareness into the broader galaxy. Rebellion cells, underworld factions, Mandalorian enclaves, and distant Imperial outposts were beginning to adjust. Every move had consequence, and every adaptation provided insight. The stage was set for the next phase: decisive confrontation, irreversible consequences, and the emergence of a new balance of power shaped not by fear or force alone, but by intelligence, adaptability, and moral agency. Finally, as Coruscant settled into the eerie calm of night, Magneto allowed a subtle pulse of energy through the city, a reminder to all that while he had paused, he was far from inactive. The chessboard was not merely set, it was alive, and the next moves would determine the galaxy's trajectory. He had tested limits, observed behavior, and demonstrated dominance. The question remained, which faction, if any, could challenge him when he chose to act decisively? Coruscant trembled as the first light of dawn fractured through the floating debris, glinting off suspended metal in an eerie kaleidoscope of reflected sunlight. Star destroyers hovered like colossal predators above the city, their hulls aligned in a formation Magneto had imposed with absolute precision. The streets, though partially cleared, remained labyrinthine corridors of twisted metal, overturned vehicles, and floating fragments, a controlled chaos that left Imperial commanders, Mandalorian operatives, rebel pilots, and Jedi alike struggling to navigate. Magneto sensed the approaching culmination of his campaign. The Empire would commit everything to remove him from the battlefield. The rebels would attempt a final, desperate intervention, and the Mandalorians would strike wherever opportunity intersected with honor. The young Jedi, that are still alive and resilient, had learned much in the past 2 days. But the ultimate test was imminent. Vader, standing aboard the Executor, projected his presence through the Force across the battlefield. The Emperor's signature malevolence lingered on the edge of perception, but Palpatine had allowed Vader discretion. The Sith Lord understood that brute force alone could not subdue Magneto. Finesse, anticipation, and lethal precision were required. He had called upon every Inquisitor, coordinated orbital bombardments, and aligned the Empire's remaining fleet for a decisive strike. Magneto, aware of the Empire's mobilization, extended his awareness. Every ferrous object in the city and orbit, star destroyers, ships, vehicles, structural beams, responded instantly to subtle mental commands. He did not strike indiscriminately, and destruction was a tool, not a first resort. Instead, he prepared the battlefield to maximize strategic advantage and minimize collateral loss. Civilian corridors were stabilized, floating debris formed choke points, and star destroyers hovered with calibrated threat, enough to intimidate, disorient, and control the Imperial forces. The initial Imperial assault came in waves. Squadrons of TIE interceptors dove through twisting debris corridors, their pilots executing synchronized maneuvers intended to overwhelm any reactive system. Magneto redirected metallic elements subtly, causing minor collisions and forcing formations to break apart. Turbo-laser fire ricocheted harmlessly off suspended metal fragments, creating controlled chaos that distracted without harming civilians. Every move, Every miscalculation by the Empire was observed and logged. On the streets, Mandalorian operatives seized openings created by Magneto's manipulations. They struck at Imperial positions with lethal efficiency, exploiting gaps in defenses while respecting civilian safety. Magneto allowed their maneuvers, observing tactical precision in real time. He noted that disciplined, honor-bound factions could exploit environmental advantages effectively, a critical consideration should he need allies or wish to manipulate outcomes subtly. The young Jedi attempted an orbital descent, guiding small metal fragments with the Force to disable critical Imperial communications nodes. Magneto detected the subtle intrusion immediately and adapted, redirecting debris to absorb the impact while leaving the Jedi unscathed. Their moral and tactical choice fascinated him. Here was a being operating under strict ethical constraints, achieving real effects despite limited resources and overwhelming odds. Vader entered the battlefield personally, his lightsaber igniting with a hiss that echoed across the metallic landscape. He moved with the calm inevitability of a predator, projecting the Force to anticipate Magneto's manipulations. "Your control is impressive," Vader said, his voice carrying through the Force. "But it is finite. All things fall before the dark side." Magneto regarded the Sith Lord, weighing the statement. He recognized the difference between Force-sensitive beings and ordinary humans. Vader could anticipate patterns, probe intent, and exploit psychological vulnerability. Yet Magneto's understanding of metal, energy, and kinetic influence gave him an advantage few Force users could predict. He allowed the Star Destroyers to descend slightly, creating a visual and psychological weight over Vader's contingent while shifting smaller metallic elements into defensive barriers. The confrontation became immediate. Vader struck first, sending a wave of Force energy aimed at disrupting Magneto's central field. Metal vibrated, suspended fragments quivered, and Star Destroyers adjusted mid-orbit. Magneto countered instantly, weaving a magnetic barrier that absorbed and redirected energy harmlessly into the void. The clash was not brute force. It was a precise dance of control, anticipation, and adaptation. Each opponent tested the limits of the other. In the streets, Imperial troops attempted to flank, but Mandalorian operatives anticipated the movement, striking with tactical efficiency. Rebel pilots engaged orbital targets, firing proton torpedoes that were deftly redirected by Magneto's subtle manipulations. Civilians, guided through safe corridors, watched from the sidelines, witnessing an unprecedented display of power, control, and strategy. Vader pressed harder, extending his Force connection and attempting to manipulate the environment to disrupt Magneto's field. Metallic conduits shifted unpredictably, debris collided with precision, and Star Destroyers rocked in micro-adjustments. Magneto countered, isolating key metallic structures and amplifying others, creating cascading layers of defense. Every action Vader took revealed patterns. Every maneuver catalogued for potential exploitation. The young Jedi joined in the direct confrontation, guiding small metal fragments and disarming Imperial squads. Their moral choice to intervene, even in the face of overwhelming power, added an unpredictable element. Magneto allowed their influence, noting that even minor deviations introduced meaningful complexity into an otherwise controlled environment. This combination of ethics, adaptability, and tactical skill was new, an unfamiliar variable that made the confrontation far more engaging. Mandalorians pressed the attack, engaging Imperial forces in tactical strikes while avoiding civilian zones. Beskar blades clanged against debris, detonations echoed off metallic structures, and the streets became a symphony of disciplined combat. Magneto observed, occasionally adjusting pathways and barriers to guide outcomes without direct interference. Each faction's skill, morality, and an improvisation shaped the battlefield, reinforcing a critical realization: raw power alone did not ensure victory. Orbital bombardments escalated. Star destroyers fired turbolasers, ion cannons, and experimental anti-metal projectiles. Debris shifted dynamically under Magneto's command, creating shields and reflecting fire into empty space. The largest star destroyer hovered in a deliberate tilt, creating cascading metallic corridors that forced Imperial ships into restricted flight paths. The spectacle was overwhelming, psychologically and strategically. Imperial morale faltered under the realization that conventional tactics were ineffective. Vader, sensing a potential opening, attempted a concentrated force strike, aiming to destabilize a central metallic conduit supporting Magneto's orbital control. In response, Magneto executed a simultaneous redirection. Smaller metallic fragments absorbed the strike while the main structure remained steady. The display was dazzling, a combination of sheer power, strategy, and adaptive reflexes. Vader's expression beneath his mask betrayed respect and concern. This was not a foe to be underestimated. Magneto then escalated offensively. With a subtle thought, he caused the largest star destroyer to descend slightly, shifting its mass to pin Imperial forces into controlled choke points. Metallic debris followed suit, forming barriers and conduits that restricted movement while avoiding civilian casualties. The Mandalorians capitalized on the created openings, striking at exposed Imperial units. Rebel pilots executed precision attacks, and targeting weapons arrays that Magneto had deliberately exposed to measure response. The climactic confrontation reached its peak when Vader attempted a direct engagement. He moved through corridors of floating debris, lightsaber igniting, force projecting energy to manipulate metal. Magneto countered instantly, isolating metallic elements and redirecting kinetic energy with precision. Each strike from Vader prompted immediate adaptive response. Sparks flew, star destroyers quivered, and smaller debris collided with explosive force, but all within controlled bounds. The young Jedi attempted a combined strike with Mandalorian forces. Metal fragments were directed to disable key Imperial weapons systems, while ground operatives engaged stormtrooper units. Magneto allowed partial success, and observing how coordinated ethical tactics and battlefield improvisation could challenge even overwhelming control. Each success and failure was catalogued, building a comprehensive understanding of faction behavior under extreme pressure. Finally, Magneto executed a decisive maneuver. The Central Star Destroyer tilted dramatically, creating a sweeping cascade of debris across key Imperial formations. Rebel and Mandalorian forces were guided into advantageous positions, civilians shielded, and the Empire forced into reactive postures. Vader, realizing the futility of conventional assault, paused, acknowledging that Magneto's mastery over metal and battlefield dynamics had surpassed all prior expectations. The aftermath of Section 9 left the battlefield in suspended tension. The Empire was not destroyed, but humiliated, and its tactical superiority nullified. Rebels and Mandalorians had survived, demonstrating adaptability and skill. The young Jedi remained alive, an ethical counterbalance within the conflict. Magneto had proven absolute mastery over the immediate environment, strategic foresight, and adaptive intelligence. But he had done so without unnecessary destruction, demonstrating a measured, calculated philosophy of control. In that moment, every faction understood a fundamental truth. The rules had changed. Magneto was not simply a powerful being. He was a strategist, an observer, and a force capable of reshaping the balance of power across the galaxy. Every decision, every tactic, and every ethical choice had consequences. Coruscant had been tested, the Empire humbled, and a new equilibrium awaited, one shaped by intelligence, morality, and unrivaled control.